Hello everyone and welcome to a little video about my writing process for the poetry prompt that we had this month for the poem If the Stars Could Speak. Anyone who's ever kind of wondered how I go about writing a poem, this will be a nice little, well I say little, it's about 40 minutes long, but actually some of it can be sped up because it's probably a bit repetitive, but it's a nice little glimpse into my process. So there's a couple of ways I tend to approach writing a poem, and it depends on how the idea has come to me. So if the idea has come to me as already lines of the poem, for example, this is how Breathe did. It came to me as the final stanza and I knew exactly what I wanted the message to be. Therefore then I can kind of work back from that or work forward from that if I know generally what the message is. When I don't, when I've just had this kind of idea, and often it's just almost like a visual idea that I've had, then this is how I go about it. I tend to try and clue into our senses. So if the stars could speak, I started to think, okay, well, they speak presumably about what they could see, what they could hear, what they could feel. And that's where all the ideas started. At this point, I still have no idea what my message of the poem is going to be. I don't know. I am just writing ideas down. And you'll see how one idea can then prompt other things as we go through. So when I was adding things to hear, like what can they hear, I thought about us, and then I thought, laughing, and then I thought, so they might see us smiling as well, they might see us hurting, and then how would that make them feel? Well, it might make them feel heavy, but also obviously the stars are light, quite literally. So I started to write all these things, and then perhaps if we were hurting, would they feel helpless, like they're just having to watch it happen, a bit like as a parent or as a carer for someone, how you might see them hurting and feel helpless. So I started to just jot all these ideas down, really, because ultimately, if the stars could speak, I'm personifying them. So I kind of wanted to give them this identity, I suppose, almost as if they were a person. And then from the kind of what can they see, what could they hear, what could they feel, I started to think, okay, so what would they say in relation to these things? Can I help? I'll share my light. Again, there is no organisation to this really beyond what you're seeing here. At this point, I still don't know what the message is, so there isn't really any coherence necessarily. But as I was writing this, I thought, perhaps it will be that, they can take our worries, our troubles. And then actually I was looking over the rest of the things that I'd written down, and I was thinking, okay, but most of these things that I've written, the sunrise, the bird song, the rain, these are just everyday stuff. These are the small things. And so then I had this kind of brainwave, maybe they'd say cherish the small stuff. Actually, don't get bogged down. Don't feel heavy by necessarily all of the big stuff in life, if you can. Cherish the small stuff, the everyday stuff. And then there you can see I kind of underlined it and put a circle around it, and then wrote, that's the message of the poem. And then I added this extra little bit, which actually you'll see doesn't really even make it into the poem, but it was sort of just something I had. And so, I just write everything down. The idea of that is really to just get everything out that's in my brain related to the topic, so that I can sort of see the wood for the trees, I guess. So from there, then what I'll do is find another piece of paper or a notebook. You saw my notebook at the beginning, and I think often people assume that I just go straight to the notebook, start writing, but actually, and I often do this in the notebook, but I thought I'd do it on paper so you can sort of see the processes more clearly. I think people then sort of assume I just go straight to the notebook, start jotting things down. Some people contact me and they say, I write poetry too, and it just comes to me, and ideas come to me and the odd line comes to me, but very rarely will a whole poem just sort of arrive in my head. this is the messy process I have to go to. So from there I thought, right, I've got the message. It's to cherish the small stuff. So now I need to think, when it comes to the stars, what would the big stuff be that they'd see, and what would the small stuff be that they would see, and then therefore talk about. So I think anyone who's listened to or read any of my collections or poetry books or poems would know that I'm really, really drawn to nature. So a lot of these things will pertain to nature. You know, the first things I wrote were planets, moon, seasons, bird song, dew on the grass. And then I was like, oh yeah, actually people exist in the world as well. I think if I had to summarise what inspires me as a poet, it would be nature and human nature. So basically the people in my life and the things around me in nature. So this is me then just trying to think to, I suppose, organise then everything I'd wrote on the other piece of paper. So either expand on it or to, you know, exclude the things that didn't matter. It's all about constantly refining the idea and refining what I've already thought of. Some things, sometimes I want to hang on to something so much that I just, I can't let it go. And you'll see probably as we go through a couple of examples of that, but sometimes it just doesn't fit with what I'm writing, so I have to let it go. So here's obviously not a completely finite list. There will always be things that then come to me, but so I read back Dew on the Grass there, and then I thought, oh, Penny on the Path, that would rhyme, so I kind of jotted that down. From that then I had this like little list, and I thought, okay, let's try and make it then into some semblance of like sentences, you know, and I can't explain how or why, but I sort of just get a feel for whether a poem is going to be rhyming or not. And this one for me just felt like it was rhyming. I write about the stars and trees and stuff a lot, and most of the time I find they're rhyming poems. And I don't know if it's because, for me, stars especially feel very like whimsical and just I suppose they bring me back to childhood a little bit. And when I think of books and stories and poems that I read in childhood, they would often rhyme, and so I think that's where that comes from. So here I started going, and I used that idea of the dew on the grass and the penny on the path to rhyme. The morning dew upon the grass, a lucky penny on the path. And then here I'm thinking, what else can I potentially rhyme with these things? So I'm looking at my list and I'm thinking, okay, hearing someone that you love laugh, but I couldn't quite necessarily figure out immediately how to fit the rhythm. So again, it's never about being perfect first time. It's about just, okay, I don't know how to make that bit work, but I want something here. And then I decided I would go with the rhyme scheme then, A, 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 B. So my poem, When, is a bit like this. When did we all lose the thrill of running full speed down the hill and marvelling at daffodils until the sun went down? So the first three lines will rhyme, and then B, and then actually what happens is it goes A, C, 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 B on the next stanza, I suppose, because it's the final line of stanza 1 and stanza 2 would rhyme. So I then started to work on this, and often what I will do is, because I tend to know the message by this point, I'll try and figure out the end so that I know what I'm working towards. So I think this was something like enjoy the small and little things, and then I clearly don't know what I'm doing. I can't rhyme things. At this point, I was in my head really thinking, rhyme butterfly wings here, rhyme butterfly wings. You've written it on your list, but I couldn't. So, and then I've done the final. Oh no! So here we go. I think I was going for the beginning. So if the stars could speak, I think they'd tell us all something, something, something. Enjoy the small and little things. And then. So I'm here, and at this point, I'll be totally honest, I was thinking, right, I've covered this on my list. I'm really struggling. To make anything else fit. I've got another example. I think, actually, reading a book is a small thing that we could cherish. Having a cup of tea is a small thing we could cherish. But here, all I'm doing is adding more things to my list and not refining the list at all. And the next stages should always be about trying to refine. So I sit here for a moment and I think, okay, what could my next stanza be? What's it going to say? There's times when I've written, almost an entire poem, or not an entire poem, but I've written probably, 5, 6, 7, 8 stanzas of something. And when you're so far invested into something, you've committed so far into it, especially if it's rhyming, there's a real part of me that thinks, I can't give up on this now. I have to stick with it. But I've learned as I've gone along with my writing is that when something's forced, it's really obvious. And I definitely have poems in some of my collections that are like that. They are definitely a little bit forced, and I shouldn't have forced them. I should have just said, okay, this isn't right now, or this isn't right in this form or in this rhyme scheme. But I didn't. I've learnt now that sometimes you just have to screw it up and start again. So here we go. At this point I'm thinking, right, no, I don't like that rhyme scheme actually. I want it to be something more like I usually write often. My rhyme scheme tends to be A, B, C, B. That tends to be how I work. So I started then playing with the rhythm of the lines and how I can kind of put all those together. So I changed the rhythm. I then started to still incorporate those ideas that I'd written down. And you'll see I'm just constantly scribbling out and changing and moving around and just trying stuff out. I think if there's one piece of advice I can give about writing poetry is that don't be afraid to just put something on paper, because you'll never know where it might take you. I quite literally started with a blank piece of paper at the beginning of this, and now we've got something taking shape. So I'm speeding this bit up a little bit because, to be quite honest with you, it's quite repetitive, like I said at the beginning. So I'm just whizzing through it so that you can see how it's actually taking shape, and you'll see some stanzas that actually pretty much make it as they are into the final poem, and then you'll also find some that change a little bit, and then some that just change quite dramatically. I'm crossing things out. I'm still really determined to get butterfly wings in this poem, but what I was finding as I was writing it was the rhythm of butterfly wings just wasn't fitting. And this is one thing I've found as I've got more and more sort of trusting in myself, I suppose, as I write poetry, is that it's not necessarily about the number of syllables in a line, or it's not necessarily about the number of beats or the rhythm. It's about how those syllables kind of come together. So for example, the words perhaps and maybe can kind of mean the same thing, but the emphasis of the syllables in both those words are different. and it means that sometimes maybe fits far better in a line than the word perhaps does. So I've learnt to really tune into that, and if it feels clunky, I just try and avoid it. Again, I have absolutely got examples of poems in the past that I have even included in collections that are clunky, and I probably, again, shouldn't have done that. But I think every mistake, I wouldn't say it's a mistake necessarily, but every poem that I read and think, oh, that jars a little bit, actually it's taught me to not accept that from myself anymore. So, and it's not about perfection necessarily, but it's just about making sure it flows properly. So here we go. I'm kind of in the flow of it now. This is what I find tends to happen. I get a bit of a, once I've got some ideas down, I get into the groove a bit, really. Now, there is that thing of, I could just try and write the entire poem out on here, but ultimately I don't want to. I would rather have it with all my rest. I don't want big collections of paper everywhere, but I do think it's important for me to keep a record, really, of my poetry. So again, if anyone's watched my notebooks video, you'll know that I used to kind of tear pages out when I'd kind of typed the poem up. I used to rub out poems a lot. I used to write in pencil and rub out a lot. But actually, I've realised that growth mindset is important, and I need to see the where I've kind of come from, the journey, I suppose. So this is where then my idea of cherishing the small stuff is beginning to take shape. So what I've done up to this point is just written about the small stuff, so the things that are important. But now I am thinking to myself, I need to contrast that then in the poem with the big stuff as well. And I am really drawn to doing that in my poetry. I'm a real fan of opposites and the juxtaposition of opposites when I write. So in my head here, I'm thinking, okay, I've kind of got some idea now, 3 or 4 stanzas probably of small stuff. I need to have the big stuff, and I need to get from the big stuff to the small stuff, and then that kind of reminder at the end that it's the small stuff that we need to cherish. So I am sort of thinking, okay, what's the beginning of the poem going to be? And I always, I suppose, envisaged that If the Stars Could Speak would be kind of up there at the beginning, because I think it invites people to imagine it as well. A bit like my poem What If. It starts with what if the mermaids are all of the women thrown overboard because of old superstition, and the next stanza starts, what if the dragons with their breath ablaze were once little lizards all thrown to the flames? What if the vampires favour the night because they've been kept in the dark most of their life? It's almost inviting the reader to think about it before you've kind of told them what you're thinking about it, really. So I do tend to kind of open with those lines a lot, a little bit like I met the moon for coffee. It was Friday night, I think. I'm sort of painting that picture already in someone's mind, and they don't necessarily know where I'm going with it, but I think sometimes then their minds go somewhere with it. And I think that's the beautiful thing about poetry, is that it's not, I think sometimes people think it's about us telling others what we see, and it is, of course, but I think there should always be that space in poetry for people to bring their own perspective to it. Just like art, when you go and stand in an art gallery, everyone's seeing those paintings in a slightly different way, and I think poetry should be the same, really. So yes, I'm very messy here. I'm scribbling. I'm desperate to write about the oceans and the planets, but I just can't quite figure out how and why and where to get there. And this, you can see, it says, but what we might imagine is that they see the stuff that's grand, the oceans and the planets and the earth on which we stand. I was probably going for. And then I thought, okay, planets, we can talk about this a little bit more. One of the challenges I think sometimes writing in rhyme is that you can sort of box yourself in if you're not careful. I think when we read poetry that really flows and rhymes, it's not actually the rhyme that matters as much as the flow, and that's why I've learnt to prioritise that kind of rhythm, and not necessarily the number of syllables or beats in a line, but the way that they come together, like I said before, because otherwise rhyme can come across as really trite, and it can be really restrictive. So for me, it's about just writing and then figuring out the rhyme afterwards, really. So here I think, right, I've got a good idea. I'm going to write it up in my notebook, and you can see when we switched to the notebook that I already had pretty much the last stanza and the first. That is really, really common when I write. I get a really clear idea of, okay, this is the last stanza, this is telling everyone kind of the ultimate message, and this is the beginning, this thing of like, oh, let's consider this, and then I sort of fill in the space in between. So I've got the first stanza. I wonder what the stars would say if one day they could speak. Would they talk of galaxies or snowy mountain peaks? Because I was thinking some big stuff. And then the final stanza I've got, yes, if the stars could talk. I can't read it now. With voices wise as oceans deep, they'd say, cherish the small stuff. They're the treasures you should keep. So again, trying to focus on the fact that actually even the small stuff can feel as deep as an ocean. That was actually changed right at the end, because again I'd kind of squeezed ocean in because I'm trying to focus, like make a point for the big stuff. But actually when I came to type it up, that's literally how it worked. When I came to type it up, I changed it, and that happened with Breathe actually. When I typed it up for my manuscript, I changed an entire stanza because as I was typing it, I just thought, no, I've got a more inspiring way to say this, I think. So it was she walked to the forest and stood with the trees. She heard the wind whisper and dance with the leaves. The one that's actually in my book, I think, says, she walked to the forest and stood with the trees. She trampled the dirt that lay under her feet. And then I changed it because I wanted it to be about what we hear in the forest. Anyway, slight detour. I digressed a little bit. So here then, I'm saying, I wonder what the stars would say. And then I start talking about, would they talk of all of these big things? Would they speak of Jupiter or Saturn's golden rings? Or would they, and then I'm like, I don't know, I can't finish that bit, jump to the next bit. Would they speak of oceans, blue and vast as they are deep? Would they tell the future? Oh no, that's it, yeah. So I wrote, blue and vast as they are deep. Would they tell the future? And then I thought, oh no, complain about the past, so I'll just switch deep and vast. Blue and deep as they are vast. Would they tell the future or complain about the past? Would they try explaining how the moons control the tides? Would they, and then again, just thought, I don't know that part, but let's go to the next, jump to the next stanza. And then that one was annoying me, so I started that one again and rewrote it out, because I'd written something about joy being able to find us, and then I thought, so what rhymes with find us? Reminders. And then I couldn't really get from, I think they'd remind us, that obviously that wasn't long enough, so I just wrote the rest of it out. I think they'd remind us to find the joy in life, and that's the way that joy will find us. So because that's the way that joy will find us. Yeah, that's a very important change. Sometimes I do that and I go back and forth between and, because then just focusing on the small stuff, I guess, which is the whole point. And then I go from that to here's my small stuff, and picking up those ideas that right at the beginning I had about birdsong and dew on the grass and pennies on the path and all that kind of thing. So I'm just checking my little lists again and crossing that out. You'll see this part now. Again, I keep referencing the notebook video, but anyone that's watched that video will have seen the finished product of really messy, scribbled out poems in my books. But you're seeing it in kind of almost real time here, real time, but just sped up a little bit. How fast I just cross things out if I don't like it. So here I'm getting towards the end, because from where the stars sit, they've something view, and then I've changed that. Because from where the stars sit, they can see an awful lot, and they've noticed that the little things, and then I know in my head, this happens actually quite a lot to me, I know in my head that I want to rhyme it with something like a lot or forgot, but I just can't quite figure out how to make it there. So then I just kind of ruminate on it a little bit, and yes, because from where the stars sit, they can see an awful lot, and they've noticed that the little things, was that what it said? And they've noticed that the way to make the most of what we've got is simply just to note yes. So then we go on to the next stanza. Again, something I probably did a little bit too much when I first started writing was thinking that every stanza had to almost stand alone, like be its own entity, that I couldn't sort of stop in the middle of a sentence or anything like that, which of course is just silly. One of the whole reasons I love poetry is that it's quite freeing. You don't have to use full stops or commas if you don't want to. You can literally write an entire poem free of punctuation if you wish. Obviously some spaces between words are helpful, but otherwise you don't need all those rules, I suppose, that we often think we need when we're writing, and so I don't know why I kind of did that to myself, but since realising that, it's really helped, because it means that I'm not tying myself into kind of finishing a whole clause or a whole point or a whole sentence at the end of every stanza. So I'm really coming to the end here. I'm just kind of referring back to this stanza here. I think they'd say to treasure children's laughter on the air, a walk with someone special. I want to say the wind in your hair, basically, but the wind within your hair sounded wrong to me. In the end, I think that's what I went for. But because I wanted to then come back to the idea of it being something really big, like in space. So where the stars are, they're surrounded by space. That's this huge, like infinite thing. But actually up there, you can't hear the wind. You can't feel the wind. You can't hear laughter. You can't see the daisies growing up from the ground. So actually, just because something's big doesn't mean that it's better necessarily. So I'm kind of, at this point when I'm writing a poem, I kind of start to breathe this sigh of relief, because I think, I feel like I'm there. I'm there, or I'm almost there. At this point, I do still have a couple of sort of half-finished stanzas. But realistically, I know that once I come to type them up, there's a really good chance that an idea will come to me. Often I need a break as well sometimes. So this was done pretty much within an hour, and the only breaks I had were kind of, I don't know, to boil the kettle or something. Poems, very rarely do I sit down and write a poem like that. But actually I really enjoyed the challenge, and I'm looking forward to doing it again next month. A lot of the time I come back to it the following day, the following week. I've returned to things after 6 months, after a year, after 8 years. One poem took me, and I find that actually that slightly changed perspective of the following day just makes such a difference. And even, as I say, when I typed this up, which was pretty much in a moment, you're going to see me sort of collate everything in a moment, like from the process, from the very beginning when I'm scribbling those ideas down to listing big and small stuff, and then starting with a rhyme scheme that I then abandoned, kind of to get to this point. Actually, most of the time I realise that when I type it up or when I come back to it, it's going to be, even if it's just, like I say, 5 minutes, it's going to be easier to find something to write, because sometimes you just need to step away from something for a moment. It comes back to, I guess, seeing the wood for the trees. And the irony actually is this poem is about seeing the small stuff. Actually, sometimes you have to step back, see the big thing, to be able to see the small stuff. But we won't focus on that, because that's not the message of the poem. I hope you have enjoyed this little sort of journey into my mind and into my process for writing. Like I say, I very, very rarely sit down and write a whole poem from beginning to end, but I really enjoyed this one and really enjoyed the challenge, and I feel like I could probably be a lot more efficient if I did this. But one thing I have learned, as I've said, is to not force things. So I did this at a time when I felt inspired to write. So whilst I've sat down and done it all in one go, what I haven't done is thought, oh gosh, I don't know what I'm going to write about. I have no ideas. I don't know where I'm going to go with this, and then forced myself to do it. I always make sure I'm kind of in the zone, I suppose, for ideas. And if I need to get inspiration, one of the best things I can do is go outside. It doesn't even have to be for a walk. It can just be to go and sit in the garden. I think we're also busy these days, and especially because essentially, I work from home, I am just constantly, I could constantly do stuff around the house. Oh, that washing needs folding. Oh, that kitchen could do with a clean. Oh, I need to, bleach the toilet. Glamorous life that we all lead. But actually, sometimes I need 5 minutes in the garden, and that's when you notice those little things. That's when you notice the bird song. That's when you notice that the leaves are changing colour, or that's when you notice that your favourite flower has started to bud. And those are the things that ground you, I think, and that remind you how kind of beautiful the world can be. And so that's what I do if I need a little burst of inspiration. And I've learnt to accept that if that doesn't give me the burst of inspiration and I am just not feeling it, I just put the pen down and come back to it another time. So obviously this was actually a really kind of good one, because I would have just stopped this and I would have come back to it the next day if I really had not been feeling it. But actually it was quite good. I managed to do it all in one go. I'm counting up the stanzas now. I do like an even number of stanzas. I don't know why. Obviously, not all of my poems have an even number of stanzas when they're rhyming, but a lot of them do. And I was just numbering them as well. So this is my journey. Obviously, I've got the scribbled up piece of paper there. I screwed up because of the rhyme scheme thing. But we've gone from some scribbled notes on a piece of paper saying see, hear, feel, heavy, light, singing, laughing, bird song, to the finished poem, which I have posted again below for anyone that needs to see it, I guess, that hasn't read it or didn't get a chance to read it before. But thank you for joining me for my little writing process video, and I will see you next month.